Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan, and today we're coming at you with the midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. Then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. Try to think of it as a time capsule. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the U.S. industry, identify top U.S. MSOs that you keep seeing pop up that you think will be worth more in the future than they are now, and take advantage whenever you feel ready, if you wish to do so, of course, pending whatever incremental reform that we get. But we're going to start with this one from Don Murphy. Thank you, Don. As of yesterday, 8:30 a.m. This a.m. in Politico. Here comes Chuck. The Senate is about to kick into a new gear with a burst of bipartisan efforts, including safe banking. So this is a story from Politico, but he mentioned Steve Daine, who is not for nothing the National Republican Senatorial Committee chair, says Schumer has been working hard and effectively on cannabis banking. And so it's nice to remember that Daines is held in that high of a regard, and his position is ideally to make Schmuck the Senate minority leader if possible. But so this is the article from Politico. I will put that link in the description if you wanted to reference through it. Mind you, Don Murphy plugs some of the important quotes as Schumer seems more optimistic than ever, and then leads a bill to claw back banking executive pay and fentanyl legislation was passed by the Banking Committee last week. Defense bill advanced last week as well, and portions of drug pricing legislation are ready for the floor. Daines is hopeful the safe banking bill will follow suit. And so there's a lot of other comments, of course, from questions that people had for Don. I'd invite you to grab the link in the description if you wanted to go through that. But just to bring you to the schedule and so what we can expect, thank you, Jesse Redmond, for sharing this. And from my understanding, this is an accurate schedule. Could be a quiet couple weeks while we wait for Congress to return in July. I could see shorts pushing prices lower as there is less risk of catalysts. And, you know, if we go to shortdata.ca, I wouldn't be surprised if the MSOs are still the top ones on there. But that's been the case for the last 2.5 years, and it's not going to change until we get safe banking. And so the Senate returns July 10th, and the last 3 weeks of the month may be exciting below our Congress's calendars for June and July. And so keep in mind, we're supposed to get some news either tomorrow or Friday or today on Cresco Labs and Columbia Care update, and so I will be sharing that on the weekend. Hopefully they can close the deal. I'm sort of expecting they might come to an agreement to extend it. But on top of that, as I have mentioned, the end of June is going to be a big deal. It seems like the whole safe situation is going to be pushed into mid-July. So just want to give you as much of a time frame as possible so that you can, make decisions according to your own situation if need be. But just a reminder that while I shared this video last week, for the last 2.5 years, we have no one to blame but Schmuck, who's been holding this bill up and not allowing the vote. And so he does have a lot of blood on his hands, as the longer he waits, the more people do sadly fall victim to dispensaries being targets for armed robberies. So just a reminder that hopefully, let's pray that this is the time we're going to get it. It would be amazing, because then we'd finally get the common sense policy we've been waiting for 2.5 years, and it would save a lot of American lives and make America much safer. And so thank you, Faith, for sharing this one. And the source is a Seattle Times article sourced from Uncle Ike's I-502 robbery tracker. Why does that even have to exist? Sadly, because cannabis is still federally illegal, and that blood is on Schmuck's hand. But thank you, Boris, for sharing this. It's imperative we keep pushing for cannabis to be descheduled. I'm of the camp that believes descheduling is better than rescheduling to a Schedule 3 in the short term. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. But he adds, the Coalition for Cannabis Scheduling Reform is calling for cannabis to be descheduled completely or rescheduled to Schedule 3 or lower. This is long overdue and necessary to help the industry flourish, no doubt. So put the link to the Green Market Report article in the description if you wanted to check that out. But from what it seems like, I don't want this to be the case, but it is that descheduling would set it up so that cannabis companies can hand the ball off to alcohol and tobacco companies over time. And maybe, hey, that would make those companies provide healthier products, just because cannabis is a much better substance than the other two that they're already dealing with. But would that possibly be better than seeing it go into Schedule 3, remain federally illegal, but then go into the hands of Big Pharma? And so I don't know if that's necessarily how it would work, but just trying to think what each possibility could lead to. But let me know in the comments if you think I'm on to something, if I'm off, and would love to hear your thoughts on that. And so with that, from Marijuana Moment, as RFK Jr. takes a shot at DeSantis over cannabis decriminalization opposition. And this is the common sense critical thinking that we need, especially out of a leader, but declines to smoke a joint with Bill Maher. Fair enough, but he does add, the current situation with contradictory state plus federal laws is absurd. Thank you for having the balls to call this out, because it's nothing less than absurd. And DeSantis just taking the status quo stance does not necessarily help at all, because it just shows that he's a puppet for the status quo. And so this is the best comment to add to this. You can be pro-legalization and just choose not to start consuming cannabis tomorrow, which I think most people are. So some comments down here to add that other people agree with the common sense, and it's just so nice to see a potential leadership candidate just think so critically and ask questions and be curious, as opposed to asking, hypothetical or rhetorical questions that just make the other side look like the bad guy. And so with that as well, just some more evidence as to why it's so absurd and why we end that federal illegality so we stop wasting so much resources on testing. Thank you, Colin Farian, for this one. The U.S. workforce enjoys cannabis more each year, and they're going to continue enjoying it more, and it's a better product than alcohol and tobacco, so might as well brace for it. This should not be a barrier to employment. Sourced from Quest Diagnostics based on 16 million tests. So I'll put this link in the description. You could always grab this if you're interested in going through it. But positivity rates for cannabis drug tests in the U.S. workforce. Educational services going up. Public administration up every year. Finance and insurance. Construction. Professional, scientific, and technical services, healthcare and social assistances, yada, yada, yada. You can read the rest. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is fascinating as more and more people are realizing cannabis is obviously not the devil's lettuce and finding their own way to use it in moderation for potential benefits. And so just to add why it's so absurd and, more reason as to why more new studies are important from January 25th, 2023. Now, I think I've shared this in the past, but I wanted to share it again just because one of the biggest arguments that propagandists use is that it causes psychosis, or the use of cannabis can trigger that. And so this is a state cannabis legalization and psychosis-related healthcare utilization. In this cohort study of claims data from 63.6 million beneficiaries from 2003 to 2017, there was no statistically significant difference in the rates of psychosis-related diagnosis or prescribed antipsychotics in states with medical or rec cannabis policies compared with states with no such policy. Booyah. And so really, there's no difference once a state goes from illegal to legal, and that's huge to shut the prohibitionists up. We love this data. The findings of this study do not support an association between state policies legalizing cannabis and psychosis-related outcomes. Further research into this topic may be informative, and of course, once we deschedule, it'll be a lot easier to do this research and frame it, in a way that's going to be constructive. And so, of course, you can pause to read the abstract if you're interested, while I'll bring you down to the results, conclusions, and relevance. Well, this is another study from the future, September 15th, 2023. Fascinating nonetheless, from Science Direct, as advanced multifunctional nanolipid carrier loaded gel for targeted delivery of 5-fluorouracil and cannabidiol against non-melanoma skin cancer. So let me try and break this down for you. Non-melanoma skin cancer is one of the most common malignancies reported around the globe. Current treatment therapies fail to meet the desired therapeutic efficacy due to high degree of drug resistance, apparently. And so what they came up with, we developed a combined therapy of 5-FU and cannabidiol loaded nanostructured lipid carrier gel to put on the skin, from my understanding, and read it and weep. Furthermore, prepared formulation showed greater tumor remission. And again, we're seeing that in different places, but seeing tumor remissions, whether it's in cells or skin cells, better survival rate, reduction in tumor number, area, and volume with improved biochemical profile. How is this still in the Schedule 1? It's an absolute absurd joke. Thus, prepared gel could serve as a promising formulation approach for the skin cancer treatment, and ideally why we ought to deschedule sooner than later. And so, full link if you wanted to go through that study a little bit more. But then this one from High Times, get this: chronic cannabis use. So using cannabis frequently shows promise to prevent brain damage in athletes, which is fascinating findings, very counterintuitive. According to a new study, pot can offset the effects of repeated blows to the head, which is especially beneficial for athletes. Who would have thought? And so maybe that's why Mike Tyson is functioning now almost better than ever, it seems, more tamed and controlled, but still looking like a monster. And so either way, you can pause to read here. I'm not going to go into it too much, but because I have a lot of stories and I don't make this video too long. But who would have thought that? Another athletic benefit of cannabis use. Pause to read, and then I'll bring you down to the bottom just so that you don't have to grab the link. Pause to read here. Only the tip of the icebergs. Again, more reason why we ought to deschedule and start doing some real research on it. And descheduling couldn't come soon enough, as it almost seems like the political scientific community is getting desperate. As this one from June 24th, a new drug breaks cannabis addiction in groundbreaking trial. And I mean, cannabis is as physically addictive as coffee. You don't really get real withdrawal symptoms unless you've used it every day. And yeah, you're just gonna have to deal with the fact that you haven't had discipline, and this is how you develop discipline, by stopping your ability to use it. And of course, don't take a drug that just masks the symptoms as opposed to you developing the discipline of not having to do something. Now, before we get into what AEF 0117 is, and I wouldn't want to put that in my body and, potentially risk what my endocannabinoid system naturally does, reading through this whole article, there's no mention of the endocannabinoid system, which exists in every human mammal, from my understanding. And so that is a red flag in and of itself. But so this drug developed by Alis Farms belongs to a new pharmacological class called CB1-SSI. Yeah, no thank you. The drug targets the type 1 cannabinoid receptors known as CB1 receptors. It counteracts the psychoactive effects of THC, the primary components of cannabis, without interfering with the receptor's vital functions related to memory, learning, emotions, sleep, and eating behavior. And they want to make these claims, but it's like the fact that we don't have much data on the endocannabinoid system and what almost seems like something that's going to counteract the natural effects of the endocannabinoid system, which again brings our body into homeostasis and brings us into balance. Hence why a lot of people use cannabis and find it as a good thing. I just want to bring you to this one comment. As apparently this has been tried before, so thank you, Brian, for weighing in. The last drug they developed for the CB1 receptor had to be removed from the market. It was for weight loss. It was called rimonabant because it caused universal suicidal ideation. No thanks. I'm fully with Brian on this one. Another prime example of them trying to mask symptoms with more and more band-aids as opposed to trying to treat the underlying cause whatsoever. And so on to some state news from Maryland Cannabis Administration. The MMCC has issued medical cannabis dispensary pre-approvals to 102 companies that will launch for adult use this Saturday, July 1st. And so this is the complete list of dispensaries in Maryland. And so I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but 102 of them. You can grab the link in the description if you wanted to go through that. Well, we've got an update from New Jersey as cannabis sales hit 179 million in Q1, which is obviously nice to see them picking up their pace as they slowly roll out more legal outlets. But it recorded an 8.7% increase from the 133.2 million in revenue generated from October 2022 through December of 2022. And so a bit more down here if you wanted to pause to read. And as we're seeing, since recreational is available and hence cannabis, the product itself, is a medicine and you can buy it recreationally, between April 2022 and June 2023, the number of patients seeking medical treatment dropped from 128,000 to 105,000 according to the state. So interesting to see that trend continue. And while Connecticut was the only outlier, last month was the first time we saw rec surpass medical. So essentially joins every state doing that. But you can pause to read the rest. Otherwise, currently there are 23 medicinal dispensaries and 33 rec dispensaries in the state. Clearly not enough to properly supply the demand. 8 million population, say 6 million or so adults. Obviously they're not all consuming, but you get the idea. Way more dispensaries would help a lot more money go into the legal market and help offset the black market. So with that, from Green Market Report, another story on New Jersey, but it's a little more technical, so I'll try and summarize it, but let me know in the comments if I'm wrong or if I missed something, to expand cannabis retail ownership and licensing. And so proposed changes following the passage of a bill would allow individuals, including current licensees, to possess up to a 35% equity stake in a maximum of 7 different Class 5 retail licenses, up from just 5%. So it seems like they would only be able to have equity in one license, get 5%. Now they can split that across 7 different ones to get up to 35%, from my understanding. And so a bit more down here if you wanted to pause to read, but that should help some of the smaller growers and the smaller license holders and entrepreneurs hopefully keep some more profits or be able to get some more equity out of that. But so on to some MSO news from Canistores.io. Trulieve Noonan, Georgia location opens tomorrow, which I believe is today, but the grand opening party is Friday, June 30th. So it's good to see Trulieve, much like the other MSOs, just keep their head down, not focus on the chatter, and try and expand early while it's cheap, especially in some of these lesser competitive markets like Georgia. While TerrAscend had a huge week. Fortunately, I found this Green Market Report to summarize all the different press releases they put out, but TerrAscend obtains $25 million loan and buys third Maryland dispensary. The company is looking for another acquisition in Maryland as it is set to go adult use on July 1st, Canada Day on Saturday, but they've announced that it has closed a $25 million commercial loan in its home nation of Canada and also acquired its third dispensary in Maryland in a $6.75 million deal. And once they go adult use, that should make them a lot of money, while the loan, which is backed by Stearns Bank, was obtained with an interest rate of 10.5% and matures in December 2024. And so still quite high, highlighting the predatory rates that only this industry faces, that no other American industry faces, but we'll deal with it until we get safe banking, essentially. And so rest down here if you wanted to pause to read, but I do wish TerrAscend luck, especially in Maryland with that adult use launching July 1st. I'd love to see Green Thumb doing the same as all the other MSOs, focusing on the business, head down, expanding early while they can and while it's still cheap, as they open Rise Dispensary Danville on June 28th, expanding its footprint to 6 stores in Virginia. And while Virginia could have been a great adult use market, sadly, again, politics got in the way of democracy, and they will not be getting adult use at least until 2025. So one day will come, and that will help their sales definitely, but until then, still good to expand early and get in on the medical action. And so pause to read there, otherwise scroll down for all the other locations and whatever more you want to learn about Green Thumb and what they do in Virginia. And so with that, from Air Wellness, press release, Air Wellness reaches contingent agreement to defer approximately $69 million of promissory note payments. And so reading through this one, very technical as well. I could get some of this wrong, and so I'll just try and keep it brief, but essentially it seems as if they've extended some of their debt into the future, which makes it easier on them now. And so more specifically, US 69 million aggregate amounts includes amendments with all of these deals, and all of them essentially which extend the maturity thereby of 2 years. Extend the maturity thereby of 2 years, which extend the maturity thereby of 2 years. And so essentially they have more time to pay off their debt. I'd consider that a positive, especially as an Air Wellness shareholder. But if I did get any of this wrong or there's something that I missed, please do let me know in the comments. Otherwise, you can grab the full link in the description if you are interested. And so with that, Air Wellness as well, continuing to expand, focusing on the business. Our team recently celebrated the grand opening of Air Cannabis Dispensary in Winter Park, Florida, marking their 61st dispensary in the state. So good job, Air. And we see MSOs piling into Florida, not only because it's a hot medical market, but of course, pending the 2024 ballot legalization, which would see adult use launch in 2025. It's going to be a massive market, unless Florida's Attorney General, who hates freedom and democracy and wants to abuse her power to oppose what 70% of Floridians want, gets in the way. As she argues that cannabis legalization ballot measure misleads voters and briefed to Supreme Court. The rampant misinformation, okay, that's a red flag right there. Anyone who uses that word should not be trusted because they want to censor any opposing views and arguments without having to debate it. Being peddled by the sponsor of this initiative about its effects makes clarity all the more pivotal. And just wanted to scroll down to some comments because Brady Cobb is from Florida and he's a lawyer, and so he's been through some of this with the previous medical initiatives, and he just says that the arguments are weak and nothing is final until the court rules. So think of it as all smoke and mirrors from now until then. But Matt, love these comments, especially Matt Hunters down here. How is anything cannabis misinformation when it's still a Schedule 1 drug? Especially when the arguments, this is from Cannabis Business Times. Ashley Moody's 4 points of argument include, so any legal experts care to weigh in, let me know what you think in the comments. But the first one, the ballot summary misleadingly suggests that the amendment would allow rec cannabis, when in fact the drug would remain criminal under federal law, but it would allow rec cannabis, much like all the other states that have legalized it. So what? The ballot summary misleadingly suggests that it would authorize other state licensed entities beyond medical cannabis treatment centers to cultivate and distribute cannabis. I don't necessarily see how. The ballot summary misleadingly suggests that the amendment limits the scope of the immunity for possession when it actually outright bans possession of more than 3 ounces, okay? And the ballot summary fails to advise voters that the amendment would leave MMTCs unregulated with respect to rec cannabis. How so? Obviously something that would be developed and implemented. They seem pretty weak to me, but I don't know. I just really hope that the will of the people of Florida will prevail in the end, but a silver lining from now until then, while DeSantis doesn't have the balls to end cannabis prohibition at the federal level, at least he signed the measure allowing telehealth option for medical cannabis renewal. So he's obviously not all opposed to cannabis in the sense that he signed this on Monday, and so under the measure, physicians will still have to conduct in-person exams before approving patients for medical cannabis and getting a card, but it will allow physicians to use telehealth visits for exams needed to renew approvals, an option that supporters say will increase patient access to medical cannabis treatment. And so, small victory there, at least in the near term out of Florida. But with that, on to New York, where we always get a good laugh as they're desperately trying to crawl themselves out of the hell that they've created. But thanks, Todd, for sharing this one. As New York City Council passed a bill to penalize landlords who knowingly lease space to unlicensed cannabis businesses. So hopefully this effort, combined with cracking down on the 15 illicit shops, will allow the 8 or so dispensaries that are selling legal cannabis and went through all those hoops, hopefully make a little bit of money. And so great comment down here, Dan G. A whopping 3 legal dispensaries in Manhattan. Apparently that's it thus far. They couldn't have fucked this up harder if they tried. And so going after the landlords now, obviously the whole idea of ending cannabis prohibition is that you don't criminalize people, but if you're having unlicensed shops, it's like selling bootlegged alcohol, and you're just not allowed to do that. Same idea. And I don't know if landlords necessarily can lease space without asking questions, so whether they can do it knowingly or unknowingly. Honestly, I don't even know. Such a shit show. So good luck, but only in New York, right? And so with that, this study suggests New York will miss cannabis tax revenue targets. I don't think we need a study to tell us what's fairly obvious to the eye, but Business of Cannabis reports, as New York predicted, it would generate $56 million in state cannabis tax revenues in the first year of legal adult use sales. The majority of that money, $40 million, they claimed will come from licensing fees paid by growers and sellers. Yeah, nowhere close to that. They failed miserably. So this is the report. I'll put that link in the description as well. Hence why all of these incompetent regulators should lose their jobs. But in a story I shared recently, I think a few weeks ago, it highlighted that the 8 legal stores in New York had sold or had accumulated roughly $1.2 million in tax revenue. And so complete fail. Do not implement socialist policies that focus on equity, because equity is not equal access to opportunity. It is equal outcomes for all, making everyone equally poor while the incompetent regulators sit around collecting their paychecks. And so we hope some good change in New York comes sooner than later. But with that, from Marijuana Moment, Minnesota Supreme Court is taking applications to serve on the new Cannabis Expungement Board being created by legalization law. The board will be formally established on August 1st when cannabis legalization takes effect. And while we'd rather see the Supreme Court just smack the gavel and have all their records expunged, sadly, when politics gets in the way, things take a very long time. And so at least Minnesota is taking the step in the right direction to create this by August 1st, and then hopefully we'll see some work done to give people their lives back. But with that, from MJ Biz Daily, last one is, how big is California's legal market? think of a small nation, obviously because California has more people than Canada essentially, which is fascinating when you really think about it. So you can pause to read down here, but the state will ring up nearly $5.9 billion in legal rec and med sales in 2023, despite the black market running completely rampant. So imagine you just, again, didn't implement socialist policies and ridiculously high taxes in California and allowed as many dispensaries as possible. Man, what a success story that could have been. And so you can pause to read here as it compares California to GDPs of countries like Germany and India. Again, fascinating, right? How big it actually is. Pause to read more here if you're interested, but essentially just to compare it with others. California's cannabis market size, how the largest cannabis market in the world compares to others. The next closest one is Michigan. And then Pennsylvania, Illinois, Massachusetts, all along. But kind of crazy to think that California is that big, but it is essentially a country in itself. And so with that, on to this one from Marijuana Moment as cannabis home cultivation becomes legal in Connecticut this weekend. So again, congrats to everyone in Connecticut that plans to grow their own cannabis. As CT officials want people to garden responsibly, like fuck off with your moral posturing and virtue signaling. People have been waiting decades for this. Just shut up and let the people be. And so they're encouraging safe and healthy gardening practices for those who choose to start growing on Saturday when cannabis becomes legal for home grow in Connecticut. And so more here if you wanted to pause to read. But again, hey, if you're in Connecticut and you want to do this and you know how, good on you. You're going to grow a lot of free cannabis for the rest of your life, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Well, from MJ Biz Daily, less than 25% of U.S. cannabis operators are profitable, as only 24.2% of the 224 respondents, to be specific, reported that they are profitable, which is down from last year's report that found that 42% of cannabis businesses were turning a profit, which is honestly a lot better, 24.4%, than I would have thought based on all the doom and gloom from all of the stories that we hear from botched states that focused on social equity and unfortunately made everyone equally poor. And so, of course, for more details down here, but essentially they're saying that, yeah, schmuck fucked us by not passing SAFE and we're still operating with both hands tied behind their backs. We are hopeful that that might change, though, based on his recent shift in tone, but then they say the report forecasts the next 7 quarters will have slower than normal growth because of the above factors, which aren't expected to change anytime soon. They'll change very quickly if Congress does their jobs and works for the will of the American people for once. And we're holding out that they might do the right thing. But again, this next month, we're gonna prove how deep the corruption runs and whether or not, we're really fucked, or, whether we are turning a page and we've hit a tipping point. But with that last story before we head off, KPMG drops Canopy growth citing ineffective control over financial reporting. Now, I thought Canopy growth situation was bad. Didn't know it was that bad, so figured I would just share some highlights. And I do jiu-jitsu with a guy that works for KPMG, so I got to ask him about this and see if he was involved in working with them at any point. It'd be interesting if he just had some inside information that I'll share, but more here if you wanted to pause to read. Otherwise, full link in the description. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Just subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody. Take care.